All right, so welcome everyone. Really pleased to have the opportunity to have another bit of time with you at this fireside chat. We don't have a fire officially, but just imagine there is one. And if it were here, it would be an environmentally friendly fire, no particulate emissions. We're really pleased to have André Hoffmann here with us, visiting time and spending some time with Yale Engineering, meeting our faculty today, and we've really enjoyed our conversations with him. The part of the goal today would be to discuss this remarkable new book, The New Nature of Business, which he has written in collaboration with our other visitor, Peter Vanna. And what I find inspiring about this book, well, we'll hear more about it, but it outlines sort of a philosophy and even a rubric for how to think about entrepreneurship and business generally as something that is somehow at peace with the environmental goals that we all hold dear here at Yale with our planetary solutions effort, and thinking about the ways that a great university alongside business leadership can work together to build a sustainable future. So before I say too much more, let me formally introduce André. He's the vice chair of the global healthcare company Roche. He's a Swiss business leader and an environmentalist. He believes in business as a force for good and advocates for a form of capitalism aimed at generating sustainable and inclusive prosperity. So we'll enjoy speaking with him today. And I guess I'd like to start out just by asking if you could tell us a little bit about the history of Roche and some interesting facts along the way for you.
Well, thank you very much. It's very exciting for me to be here, especially in front of students who are going to be shaping the future. You are the future leaders. I'm sure your teachers tell you that every day, so I'm going to reinforce the message. We need you to make the world a better place. That's my introduction. Now, why should, before I speak too much about our company, why should you come and listen to me? And I think that there are two things which I would like to put forward. The first thing is that I've spent quite a lot of time trying to think about these different issues which we have put into the book. And the reason I wrote this book is because I wanted to make sure that I have an opportunity to structure the thoughts that I have been carrying around for a while. And now, why do I have these thoughts? Because I was, I had the benefit of having a very split youth. On one side, my father, a famous zoologist, an ornithologist, a specialist of birds, grew up in the Camargue. That's the place you see here on the book, which, by the way, you can find on Amazon. His activity in looking after birds, brought him at an early age to move away from the town of Basel to a small research institute he created in the south of France, in the Camargue, where I grew up. And so the house there was completely full, was always full, of visiting scientists who were interested into understanding the ecosystem of the Camargue and how it works. The Camargue is the delta of the Rhone River, and that's a very specific type of environment with some characteristics which I think make it particularly appropriate for studying ecosystems. And so I grew up with science, and I grew up with a lot of people looking at that. But at the same time, as you mentioned, my great-grandfather started Roche. Roche is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And so the conversation was not just about science and nature, it was also about health and business. The thing that united both is science. You cannot do a pharmaceutical business without looking at innovation, without looking at science-based innovation. And on the other hand, nature provided this wonderful ground for research and for understanding how ecosystems function. So the fact that I was able to drive these two sort of life in parallel led to us a moment where I had to decide if I was going to go to stay in nature or if we're going to go towards business. And I did very courageously decide that I would not make a choice and I would do both. Yeah? And that's, I think, is the thing that makes me as an interesting person to talk to, because I live every day the paradox of development, business, big international corporation, and the preservation of what you have the most precious on the planet, i.e. the planet itself, nature. And that's really why I wanted to bring forward as an introduction to why I think my point of view is different, because I have I construct a bridge between business and the environment based, rooted on innovation, and I think that's important. Now, you've asked me the question about why Roche, not about why...
I'm just sure you can dream up some anecdotes for us about your early years working with Roche.
Yeah, well, I can, so my great-grandfather started the company. My father sat on the board for a couple of decades. And when I was considered to be of age in 1996, which was the 125th anniversary of our company, no, 120th anniversary, 100th anniversary of our company, I'll get there, I was elected to the board. And I remember very well that when I was elected to the board, of course, there was a lot of interest into the different business circle in which I was. And I started asking around, well, guys, this is wonderful. Now we're in business. What can we do for nature? And I was like, don't be ridiculous, André. We're professional, we're in business, we make money. Nature is not in the boardroom. Nature is in the Amazon, it's in the Camargue, it's far away. Let us make money, and with the money we have, we will give you some funds for your birds in the Camargue. And that was really sort of, for me, a sort of day of reckoning, where I realized that we were all in the same planet, but we were living in some very different worlds. And there was very few people and there are very few people who can make the distinction between the two. In the book, we talk about the swimming pool, with the lanes. We swim in lanes, and we rarely meet. If you really want to have a competition, you swim on, everybody in his own direction. But if somebody makes something bad with the water there, well, it affects you there as well. We're all in it together. And that's how I was able to impress on the people in the company that nature does not matter just because it's beautiful, but it matters because it is part of the life support system on Earth, which is what we're trying to defend now. So 28 years later, I can say with absolute conviction that the future of the company is completely understood to be interlinked with the future of the planet. And that wasn't the case before. So that, if you want an anecdote, that's one anecdote. We could add to it one very simple dimension. When we do our strategic exercise in the company, we need to think about what the world will look like in 5 years' time. And in the past, we could say, well, nature will stay the same. The company, will evolve. Today, we know that nature is not inexhaustible. It's not inexhaustible. Sorry, we are using the natural resources collectively quicker than we can regenerate them, and that's an important factor for business planning for the company as well.
Interesting. So I know in the healthcare world, there's frequently moments where the big fish eats a somewhat smaller fish, or opportunities for companies to merge, but you stayed as a solo company. Were there points along the way when you had to make a decision about this?
So that's the introduction to the book. So we have a family-controlled business, but the family-controlled business does not mean there's just one person involved. It means there is a group involved. And groups sometimes have a tendency of if everybody is supposed to do everything, it ends up with nobody doing nothing. And I think that we were a bit suffering from that syndrome. We were in very comfortable circumstances, and we were sort of trying to look at the future in a way where we shouldn't get too involved. And then our neighbor, our competitor, our direct competitor, made an offer and said, we want to buy you because obviously you're not good owners, you're not looking after the business. And that was a very important time for the family history, because suddenly we had to regroup. We had to regroup under a decision. Are we going to sell, or are we going to keep? If we keep, we need to get involved. We need to get more active. We need to actually take control of what's going on. Because being an owner is not just a privilege, it's also a job. And especially in companies which have this long cycle to innovation, up to 15 years before we can bring a molecule to the market, we need to make sure that we can guarantee stability, long-term thinking, and better allocation of resources than just servicing shareholders. So we took that decision a little bit instinctively. We did not really have lots of robust processes, but we do now because we knew that it was something that we needed to do as a consequences. So yeah, that's the answer.
And how did your experience with the company lead to the inspiration to write this?
Well, I was trying to say that in my introduction in a certain way. The fact that we were not really dealing with nature as a dimension is something that, as a living necessity, is something which I really think we needed to address. And so the book talks about 3 big things that business should be doing when you consider the future. The first one is very clearly that we need to not just look at financial flows, but we need to look at impact. What are the consequences of our action when we are in charge of that sort of business? And for me, just measuring financial flows is a very narrow way of looking at this. Businesses are far more complex than just a profit and loss and a balance sheet. In our case, it's 1,000 people. It's 100,000 people. It's about 120 million patients taking our drugs every year. This is about dimensions which you cannot just talk about margin or cost towards income. You really need to understand the consequences of what the decisions are that we are taking. And so the measurement of the impact on the social, the human, and the natural capital is crucial to be able to create the sustainable value that we want to achieve out of this. Now, how do you do that? Well, first we need to define the human capital. It's each one of us individually. Are we happy? Are we well? Are we at ease with ourselves? Do we do the things we want to do? Do we know where we want to go and how to do that? How can we create this state of self-realization, which I think we all aspire to? So that's one way of measuring impact. The other one is impact onto the social system. The contract that unites us, what we owe to each other, what our rights and our obligation independently towards each other. For instance, why did you all come here today to listen to me? You could have been staying in front of your screen watching football or watching soccer, as you say here in the US. There are certain sort of characteristics of us as a group which we need to understand and which are influenced by whatever decision we take in daily life. And then the third one is nature. Now, as I said earlier on, nature not as a beautiful thing, not as the panda or not as the lion or not the tiger, but nature as the life support system on Earth. If you don't have nature, we will die. And we are at the moment very actively, very efficiently destroying it. So we need to take that into account. And so if you understand the impact that each one of you dealing in the company, because we're talking about the company here, but also in every walks of life, in every organization, every politics, in every NGOs, whatever, in every walks of life, when you take a decision, you have an impact on the social, the human, and the natural capital. And these 3 impacts are interdependent. The 3 capitals, are interdependent. You need to really understand the consequences and how you can use that to create a robust solution. So that's the first thing we talk about in the book, and I think that that's something that we can apply to our daily lives every day. The second thing we talk about in the book, and I think is an important one, is how do we put value to nature? We use, I believe that the capitalistic system is a system that's going to survive us, and it's a system that we need to continue to defend. We cannot practice it as it is, because the current status quo is destructive. We're getting closer and closer towards the precipice, and I think there are lots of elements that we can talk about to describe this. But we have one of the weakness of our model is that we have decided that nature is free for all. That a glass of water is for free, that a breath of fresh air is for free. And that's not true. It has a cost, because every single time we do something acts on it. And we need to measure that, and the best way to do that using capitalistic system is to include nature into our balance sheet. When we are able to put the value to nature on the balance sheet, we can then become a part of the profit and loss account, and suddenly we look after it better because it has a value, and that value we need to defend. Now, putting nature on the balance sheet, looking at impact, is wonderful, and it will probably help us to create a more sustainable prosperity. But who's going to make that? Who is going to take these decisions? Who are the people who are going to be able to have sufficient humility to accept that the current status quo doesn't work? And who are the people who are going to act on this, to actually have the courage to take decisions? Humility and courage are the two dimensions which I would like to see practiced in the people I recruit for our company, in the people that I work with. Because today, the idea of thinking that all you've learned at school is exactly what you need to apply is probably wrong. You're going to be confronted with problems which we probably don't really have the dimension of yet. And so we need to make sure that there is sufficient humility to listen and then to act on it. So that's what I would define as leadership. And also, making sure that in our companies we give ourselves sufficient space, sufficient distance to be able to take these decisions without compromising our own career. Today, if one of the managers I know tells me, from now on I'm going to manage my business for the well-being of society, I don't predict a very long career. This is too enormous. It will have to be done in small steps. It will have to be done as we go along. And so that's the book, in fact. Voilà, you don't need to read it anymore.
So can you point, though, once you started including these ideas in the balance sheet, to a specific policy change or a specific action that makes concrete this idea and how you could think of taking actions to improve?
So one of the first things we did at the company is to define our purpose. What do? We don't exist to make money. We don't exist to serve shareholders. We exist to serve the patient. And we decided to capture that with one sentence, doing today what the patients need next. Mm-hmm. So if you want to do, you need funds, of course. So profitability is a given. If you don't have profitability, you can't really continue to work for the patient. But what's important is to do today for next. And so you have this long-term horizon. So the first thing we've done in the company is to stop a planification system that's just on a one-year cycle. We try to look a little bit longer term and try to see how we can create value in the interest of the patient for the long term. I'll give you a concrete example. When the pandemic came and suddenly COVID was everywhere, we were the first company to bring on the market a rapid testing system. Which is a kit where you remember all, you have to put in the nose, you have to dilute it, you put it on the, you remember. Our test had about 12 steps before you can use it. And these 12 steps were all, once used for a test, deemed as medical waste and had to be thrown away. You cannot recycle medical waste. Well, now that the pandemic is over, and we are developing new tests, but we redesign these tests to make sure that there are less steps in the process. And if I remember well, we now are down to 5 steps, which means that when the next time you're going to have to test yourself, you're going to use less material, and we're going to have a lower footprint on humanity. That's an example. There are a lot of others there.
And was there, other than just the obvious benefits of less waste, was that quantifiable in a way that you could kind of demonstrate down the road?
Well, that's a very interesting point, because if we say that financial is just too narrow a measure to demonstrate how you can respectively create value for the company, then we can't really use finance to just say that it's working or not working. You need to have a level playing field in that context. But what's important in that way of thinking is the individual value of each person. Mm-hmm. We started creating a corporate governance sustainability committee, which I chair, 22 years ago. And by doing this, we sort of told all employees, this is important and it matters. And a lot of the people understood that by saying, well, the owners, they like nature. And so why don't we do something? And so there was a lot of small initiative in the company, small initiative after small initiative after small initiative. The example I always give is the nesting box, which a couple of people put onto the building. Suddenly birds were coming back into the campus. Nice idea, but it was not really what we were talking about. But it allowed a number of people within the workforce to contribute. And this sort of pyramidal effect eventually led us to 2 years ago recruit a sustainability officer and we now have when I say sustainability officer, a whole sustainability office, which is part of strategy. So today when we strategize, sustainability is part of this. And that's how we are able to create complete support for it, because everybody in the company believes in it. It's not something we said one morning, hey, I've been to Davos, we have to do something about sustainability. It's really something that comes from the bottom up and which has guided our process.
You mentioned a number of case studies in the book. Is there a sort of a favorite one that you like to discuss?
Well, I like our own one. I think we're a good business case at the beginning of it, and I have absolutely no doubt that the fact that we have a family control encourages us to think for the long term. So we think in a transgenerational way, by the difference than most publicly quoted company who have to sort of think for, over the next 3 months, the next quarter. We have a corporate governance structure which is rather unique because there are 2 types of paper quoted on the stock exchange. One is the shares, and the other one is some sort of piece of paper which doesn't exist anymore, which just gives right to dividends and nothing else, so no voting right. And the fact that we can control the whole company, although it's quoted on the stock exchange, gives us this hybrid approach, which I think is quite relevant, because it gives us the sort of rectitude of long-term thinking, but at the same time it gives us the absolute imperative obligation to satisfy the financial analysts who are following us, because otherwise if our share price is too low, our cost of capital is going to go out of proportion. So we have these 2 what's the word? These 2 discipline that we have to maintain. On one side, we have to satisfy the family and the patient, and on the other side, we have to satisfy the financial analyst. And that's a very interesting exercise because it makes us walk on this tightrope constantly. And that's where you get in a position where you can, like I'm trying to do today, defend the advantage of the long term compared to the short term.
And what do you think schools of engineering or schools of environment, universities can do to sort of evangelize the perspective you present in the book?
Well, I think it's really quite important to understand that the prosperity we live in particular, look at this wonderful building. Some very generous individual has decided to give back something. And I say give back and insisting on it because for me, giving back implies that you have taken. And the traditional way of creating value is about taking. It's not about sort of sharing. And I think that in going forward, we really need to be very careful about how we're going to create these values. I think the future, we need to really take this maxim at heart, which is, it's not how you spend the money that matters, it's how you make it. And so companies should be able to produce the value needed for society, the value that is bringing us this prosperity, without having to compensate afterwards because too many shortcuts were taken during the value proposing business. So if you are going to be the leaders of the future, if you are going to go out and lead businesses or influence opinion or go into government, you need to remember that what we need is a good dose of common sense. Not common sense, but commons sense. We need to think for the global commons. And that's really what I would like a school like Yale, or indeed other business school, to be able to bring forward. This notion of short-term profit maximization, the decision taken by Homo economicus, who constantly decides in his immediate best interest I hope there are not too many economists in the room, but I mean, you know, this notion that the Homo economicus is always right is, of course, an absolute lie. You know, the principle of the Chicago School of Economics of the 70s, the business of business, Nobel Prize winner 1976, Milton Friedman, the business of business is business. And the only thing that matters is for companies to make money so that they can give it back to society, so that society can use it to correct the externalities created by the value creation on that perspective. That's just rubbish. You know, we need to change that. We need to make sure that at the origin we do something rather than as a solution later on. You know, they taught us at school, and I think probably at the business school they still teach you that the market is always right. No, it's a lie. The market needs regulation. The market needs creation of a level playing field. You need at least as much state that you have, and probably even more than what you have. Because you need to be able to create this regulation which allows us all to compete in an equal manner in the interest of all. And the idea of saying that the more you deregulate, the more value will be unleashed. Sorry, we tried that. We tried that, and look where we are.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And remember to vote.
Did I talk about voting? I'm a Swiss, I'm neutral. I'm not coming here to tell you anything. You work it out.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much. I would love to open it up to the audience for any questions that you might have. First hand here. Oops,
I think there's a mic. Yeah. I mean, it's a lovely room, but it's a bit sonore.
It'll be recorded for posterity if you speak into the
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you mentioned this idea of prioritizing impact over short-term profit maximization. I was just wondering, could you quantify that impact? How exactly does Roche go about measuring it? Are there any specific pinpoint goal items you look for? How does that work?
Okay, so we need to look at two things in parallel. First is for industry as a whole, for business as a whole. There is a school of thoughts growing more and more. I chair an organization called the Capital Coalitions, where we are trying to bring about a metric to measure impact on the free capitals. And that school of thought has spun out a couple of KPIs designed for the totality of the industry. I'm thinking in particular of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, which is an initiative of the foundation IFRS, the International Financial. I knew I was going to get financial RS. I mean RS, yeah. You know, which is the European way of measuring account. By opposition to the GAAP accounts you have in the US. And here in the US, there are a couple of standards like this which are being worked out as well, the most famous one being FASB. And these can be applied by businesses to measure their impact in a sort of agnostic way, sector agnostic way. Now, these are not mandatory, but frankly, I'd be very surprised if they are not made compulsory within a couple of years, because there is such a consensus building up. So many people are asking for this, and not just at the United Nations Convention, also at accounting level. So I think that reporting system on impact will harmonize very soon. We at Roche are using one consultant called the Value-Based Alliance, where we are trying as well to express our profit and loss, not only in financial terms, but also alongside an impact profit and loss. I do hope that before I retire from the board, we will have the two of them together and produce an integrated profit and loss account, but that will probably not happen for a couple of years. On the other hand, you can say that that is just reporting. And reporting is exciting because it gives you transparency, it gives you an opportunity to compare, but what you really need is a management tool. How do you, inside the company, actually decide based on this? So it's the same parallel that you would do with account and management accounts. And management accounts are sort of analytical and are sort of going deeper into certain parts of the process. And that we still need to work on. But it's an excellent question, and it's happening.
Other questions? Yeah. Okay.
Reporting system, international financial reporting system. I got it. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of two questions.
Yeah.
One, I glanced through Roche's therapeutic pipeline before coming. You currently have 3 medications in development for obesity, 2 that are GLP-1 agonists, which would put you in direct competition with Eli Lilly. One, how are you thinking about advancing access? It seems like you take a very humanist approach with the environment. How are you planning on advancing medication access in the United States, given how unaffordable some pharmaceuticals seem to be? And two, it looks like you're looking into peptide-based therapeutics. And Eli Lilly seems to be taking a similar approach, but kind of different in that they seem to be developing out their peptide therapeutics for obesity, but also going back to small molecule receptor agonists. Where do you see the industry going with respect to the medication development types, given the logistical constraints with developing peptides?
So the pharmaceutical industry in general has been driven by science for a long time. And so rather than going into peptide, GPL1s, or that sort of specific molecule, let's try to understand that the way it's been going, we are going more and more towards diseases which are expensive to treat, and I think in particular about oncology, and a patient base which is not large enough the patient base that can afford to pay for this expensive medicine is not large enough in the long term. If you want to really get to a point where you want to be able to make people healthier, you probably will have to look at fields which are wider than just oncology. Oncology, we've made huge progress, and there are a lot of these diseases which are today more treatable than they were in the past. But as a result, we have neglected some absolutely obvious big diseases, like all the metabolic system is all the metabolic area, Alzheimer, Parkinson, diabetes, yes, obesity. I mean, all these things have been slightly neglected until somebody stumbled up about this GPL1 benefit, Novo Nordisk for not naming them, and that sort of exploded in an incredible succession of new discoveries. So I think what I'm trying to say in simple terms is that we need to pivot away from sophisticated, perhaps over-sophisticated therapies for complex molecules. We need to pivot a little bit more towards prevention. And if you want to prevent, our company is the world leader in diagnostics and in vitro diagnostics, and we can actually identify at an early stage who is potentially going to carry the diseases we're just discussing. And so perhaps we can move a little bit up the value chain and make sure that we identify the potential patients before they're ill, which would lower costs for everybody, and in particular for the patient. Now that's one point. That's the future, if you want. Rather than serving a small population with expensive drug, we should go and serve a large population with cheaper drugs. I think that has to be the model. Now, access to medicine is, of course, crucial. That's what will determine our impact scoring eventually, because that's what we do. We sell medicine, and if people we're selling it to cannot afford them, what's the point of selling them? So we need to be able to find a mechanism that will allow us to access to a bigger group of patients to access it. So we have, in developing countries, spent quite a lot of time partnering with healthcare systems by providing them with training, free instrumentation in diagnosis, general understanding of how we can not only provide the drugs, but also make sure that they are applied. Because the biggest cost really is the non-compliance of patients because of the lack of efficacy of healthcare systems in the developing world. And then we need to help. Now, in the US specifically, we have a foundation, the Genetic Foundation, which helps people who cannot afford the drug to a certain level. We're not going to give them for free, but we are able to help certain patients. By the way, the Eli Lilly molecule was developed by us. We just didn't believe in it, and we sold it to them. Can't win them all.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hello. Do you think that effective regulation can take the place of corporate responsibility, move it to the government level? And what do you think about that relationship?
So I think that effective regulation is absolutely indispensable. It's not just a question of good intention. When I was talking earlier on about finding some regulator who can really help to create a level playing field, it works both ways. At the moment, the game is easy. The regulator stops us making profit, and we are trying to go around them to continue to make the profit. So it's a sort of stupid confrontation, which is not in the benefit of everybody. But if we do have this common sense on both sides, we can actually get to regulation which is better for all. And that's, this is a norm that we have to give ourselves. I don't see that as impossible. But we have to move out of this confrontational approach and get into a together approach, a public-private partnership. Partnership for the good, partnership for the patient. And I really don't see why we shouldn't be able to do that. Maybe you know something I don't know.
I doubt it.
Thank you for your talk. My question is, how is Roche incorporating AI into the drug discovery, drug development process? And is that something that's going to persist long run in the pharmaceutical industry as well?
So AI has a contribution to our business, which is at several different levels. There's, of course, the help to research. We were talking this morning about the folding of proteins, how AI suddenly allowed to understand much better the multi-dimension needed for really understanding how proteins behave under the microscope. Secondly, AI will have an impact into the way we run our businesses. One of the most important way of understanding what the future of health looks like is to understand the data from patients and to aggregate them, to use them to anticipate what should be happening, to get some learnings out of them. In the UK, you have, since the Obama administration, a framework which allows you to use this data once they're decoupled from the identity of the person, and this computational, the HIPAA protocol, the computation power applied to this is starting to yield some very interesting results. In the past, you had to have a hypothesis and then you would go and test it. Today, you just throw the data into the machine and the hypothesis comes, and then you can actually empirically decide what you want to do. That's a huge change. There are lots of diseases which have not even been described yet, which the AI can describe before we get to them, which I find, for me, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But data, big data, meta-analysis, improvement of visualization of the molecules, and then, of course, also improvement of the system in which we distribute this medicine. So I'm not going to surprise you by telling you that this AI is there to stay, and to stay for a long term, and it will be part of the way we do business. We recently developed a new research center in Switzerland with a number of wet labs. Well, we've worked them in such a way that they can become dry labs quickly, because I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10 years we were going to need much less labs and much more silico.
Hello, thank you for the talk. Talking about global health and human impact into the health of the humans, malaria is a big thing in the world, especially, of course, not Europe or America, but in Africa. I want to ask, what are your thoughts there? What is the approach to fight against malaria? Is it more like the vaccination, or drugs, or a combination of both, or genetic modification of the mosquitoes or of the parasite?
So we have a policy which is we want to be first in class or best in class. And some years ago, we launched, some decades ago, we launched a product in malaria called Fansidar. I'm afraid I don't remember the name of the molecule. And that product proved that it was good, but not the best. And we didn't really have a follow-up program after that. So at the moment, we're not present in malaria research or in malaria treatment. We do a program in antibiotic microbial resistance, in AMR. We are maybe even the only company still doing that. This is a very difficult business model. If you find an antibiotic that works, the first thing you should do is never use it, because the moment you start using it, the microbe starts adapting to it, and you don't want that to happen. But still, we're doing it because clearly it's going to become a big need at some stage. Already now, antimicrobial resistance is happening in our hospitals, in the US hospitals as well, as quite frequently. So we need something against that. But in the term of malaria, I'm not quite sure. I think, if I remember well, Novartis is working on this, and they have some vaccine which they have high hopes for. But it's a field I don't really know. You know.
Yes. Sorry to butt in. I can speak to this a little bit. I worked at GSK last summer, and they, I think, have developed a version of the malaria vaccine that works, that's being deployed actively. The NIH also recently just commissioned the PFS 230 transmission blocking malaria vaccine, which works by spreading contact between individuals. So these two approaches are the most potent ones currently on the market.
Maybe you should use the microphone so that everybody can hear it, but too late now. Too late, it's done. It's fine. Fine.
I guess I can repeat for people that didn't hear. I worked at GSK last summer, and they developed a malaria vaccine that is currently being deployed in low resource areas that is very effective. Additionally, the NIH, which is where I worked my freshman summer, worked on the transmission blocking PFS 230 malaria vaccine, which is also actively being deployed in parts of Africa that works by stopping contact between individuals as opposed to stopping the individual's resistance to the microbe itself, merely that they can't spread it as opposed to their own memory B cells.
Thank you very much. I learned something. Thank you.
I think the next.
In the back, there's a question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to ask what can be done, maybe from the side of a company, to improve the sustainability of supply chains, because the complexity seems also to be rather a big challenge today. And maybe if you think that sustainability standards are the key, or if there are other tools that we can use to improve the sustainability of supply chains.
The sustainability of supply chain.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, when you talk about CO2 emission, you talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And if you want to maintain your own emissions, you try to measure scope 1, because that's this. But one thing we tend to forget is that scope 3, which is the one that are induced by our consumption, are scope 1 for somebody else. And so if you really want to look at the whole value chain, you need to get to the same sort of logic. You need to make sure that each participant in the value chain take the sustainability as an important criteria. And that gives me the opportunity to insist that this book is not about just what Roche is doing. Roche is an example, but it's about how business can raise the game in matter of sustainability. Because if we don't have a system of value production that is sustainable, we will not be able to create the prosperity that is needed for humanity to survive. So I think it's important to underline that. We should be looking at our value chain at every time, or in whatever business, not just in Roche. In Roche, we've introduced something we call product stewardship, where we look at value chains not as a general concept, but at each individual product. How can we sort of look before and after, and how can we minimize it? But there are many other ways of doing it, and if we don't get to a sustainable value chain, well, our businesses are not going to be sustainable. And by the way, at the moment they're not, as you know.
All right.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. So I noticed that Roche has done a lot of very successful collaborations and partnerships with biotech companies. Most recently with Carmort for the obesity drugs.
Correct.
Also Telavant for the autoimmune disease, and with another Chinese biotech for oncology drugs. And I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about the difference between the biotech ecosystem in the U.S. and in Europe?
The difference into what?
In the difference between the biotech ecosystem in the U.S. and in the Europe.
First of all, we define ourselves as a biotech company. We're not pharmaceutical, we're biotech. We're the biggest biotech company in the world, and we're proud of that. The whole development of the monoclonal antibody, which has helped us to have a portfolio which has made a difference in cancer and in oncology in a broader sense, is something that is based on biotech capacities. It's the old Genentech. frankly, at the moment, I see very little difference between the both places. We were talking this afternoon about the development of how can you get new ventures to flourish. And one of the things you absolutely need is this ecosystem that supports new ideas. So you need good universities who spin off some molecules, who are then funded by venture capitals, who then get the proof of concept, the funding to go to the market, and then you need the market to develop it. In Europe, we are much more fragmented. We are much more. We have different jurisdictions. Our new molecules are more difficult to bring to market than you have here in the US. So a lot of innovation coming from the Federal Institute of Technologies in Lausanne and in Zurich eventually make it to America because it's easier to sell in a big market than it is in a small one. I think that's the biggest difference, the market conditions. Otherwise, in terms of intellectual property, in terms of talent, in terms of capacity at inventing new ideas, I think we really are a match.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Maybe we can take one last question since his hand went up right at the end. Yeah.
Thanks so much for this talk. I'm just curious, there are a lot of upcoming drugs that are losing exclusivity in the next few years, especially a lot of oncology drugs, so Keytruda or Opdivo, and I'm just very curious what Roche is doing to position itself for these upcoming expiries, kind of maybe strategy or kind of the long-term play, especially since it is one of the largest, the best oncology companies in the world. Thank you.
So as I was saying before, our strategy is absolutely determined to be the first or the best. And since once the patent expires, we have already acquired a certain franchise, there are a number of research projects going to continue with the same franchises when there is a new molecule available. If there isn't, we will just exit. We are not manufacturing generics. We don't want to compete on that basis because it's something we don't do particularly well. I mean, it's not a question of high moral ground or something. It's just that we're not very good at it. And so in that context, inventing new products depends very much from where the science takes us. Because a lot of these products can be used in different settings, and in different settings they have different impacts. Again, there the AI will help us enormously because we can then test these molecules towards other pathologies without having to get too involved into tests. So I don't have a definite answer to that question. I think it really is very much, we'll take it as it comes.
That's great. Well, thank you once again, André, for a wonderful talk and very informative. I learned a great deal, I have to say. Thank you for coming.